This is California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined today by a member of the West Covina City Council. His name is Mike Spence, and I admit it, when you came on our show recently and said you were calling for an audit, you were asking the controller to audit the city of West Covina, I thought you were off your rocker. Why would you want to call for an audit, and what did you tell me?
Well, I wanted to call for an audit to clear up a lot of allegations about the past. Obviously, I'm a newly elected city councilman, so there's no skin off of my nose.
Well stated.
But I thought we needed to put some issues to bed, and I thought the state controller's office, they had done it in other cities, like in Bell, and I thought it was something that they should look at.
And I thought, okay, so you decided to call for an audit, fine. It will never happen. Well, boy, I was wrong. Here's the headline: Controllers accepting the audit request of the city of West Covina.
That's right. And he says there's some questionable things that he wants to look at. Plus, he added to what we wanted to look at. He wants to look at how we spent gas tax and other funds, special funds, to make sure they were spent properly. And so that audit should start soon. And
yeah, so what exactly happens? I mean, all kidding aside, what will happen? And when there is the results delivered, what will then happen?
Well, it really depends on the results. I mean, did he find there was wrongdoing, or did he find out there was mistakes made by staff or in the way things were accounted? I think it's important for West Covina. We've had a lot of accusations about past councils, and I thought it was a good way to clear the air was to have someone come in and do it. And obviously, if he finds out there's wrongdoing, then we'll deal with that as a council and turn that over.
Are there allegations, again, just allegations, that there may have been some wrongdoing beyond just malfeasance, but shenanigans?
Right, yeah, there's people that make that accusation almost every council meeting about the previous council, and it's important, I think, to get past all that one way or another. And so I think this way we'll get a look at all those funds, we'll see what was spent, was it spent properly, was it appropriate, and if it wasn't, then we'll deal with that as a council, and if it was, we can move on and go forward with trying to right the city.
But I presume this is not a situation like Bell. I mean, we don't expect that to be uncovered.
Well, no, it wouldn't be obviously that kind of level, and there obviously weren't those kinds of issues. But there were issues, accusations. We had a lot of redevelopment money, and with the whole change in redevelopment money loans, there were a lot of issues. And so, I mean, there's a lot of issues, I think, to look at. And, I'm glad the controller agreed to look at it in his final days.
So what happens? The audit occurs. What's a timeline for something like this? Let's say, we start on day one, then what? Do we have a sense how long it takes?
That's a good question, because I've been asking that because the controller, there's an election coming up and there won't be an elected controller right away. So I'm not sure how fast that has to work in the next little bit. So that's what we're unsure of, but we'll get our answers pretty quickly. They want to get to it right away. So I think they want to try to wrap this up as soon as possible. Okay, let's shift gears, if I may, and talk about a subject that's a lot more fun, I think. Well, some would say that. And that deals with the question of medical marijuana. It's interesting. This is kind of silly and funny, but I recently went to Colorado. I was there on behalf of Charter Communications doing interviews with folks elected to their state legislature. And I'm walking down the street in Grand Junction, and a homeless person barks out at me, "Hey," and I'm expecting him to ask for money. "You got any rolling papers?" Now, only in Colorado would someone bark that loudly, because it's legal in Colorado. That's right.
Not even for medical purposes, it is completely legal.
Correct.
And so here in California, though, we're not quite there yet, although query whether we may be in the future. But let's talk about what's going on in West Covina and the question of medical marijuana dispensaries.
Well, there's a question about whether there can be medical marijuana dispensaries, and if so, under what conditions, and then even mobile ones, people that drive them, deliver them to cancer patients or whatever. And so, I mean, that was an issue that we had in West Covina. And neighboring cities, some of them have banned them completely.
Right. I mean, as you know, the California Supreme Court ruled recently out of a case that came from Riverside, I believe, that it is within the purview of cities' zoning laws that they can choose to accept or reject medical marijuana clinics, even though Prop 215, 16?
218.
218, whatever.
No, 215.
Yeah, whatever the number is. In 1996, that I know. Even though that passed, there are zoning ordinances that the city can rely on to ban the clinics.
Right. It's unclear whether they apply to mobile ones, because that's a whole different issue. If you have a mobile dispensary driving through your city, what do you do about that? So, the law is actually unclear on that.
So let's talk about those two areas. So there's the question of, will West Covina allow medical marijuana clinics storefront, brick and mortar? The vote was?
Well, the vote was 3-2 to continue ban them. We have a ban in place now based on the fact they're not quote unquote legal businesses. I actually was one of the two, which I know probably surprises people.
Yes, and let's talk about that,
Okay.
if I may. And I know that you're elected as a nonpartisan,
Right.
but I think it's I'll out you as a Republican because you're very involved in the party, and so one could say, you would think a Republican would vote, vote, I guess, yes or no or whatever side it would be. What made you decide to vote in favor of allowing medical marijuana clinics?
Well, what I wanted to do was bring back an ordinance that once these things are legal, I mean, in any audience, I say, how many of you think marijuana will be illegal in the next 5 years?
Yeah.
And no one raises their hand
Yeah.
because clearly the trend line is it's going to be legal. It's going to be legal in some fashion. So what I wanted to do was prepare for the future. Was how are we going to deal with this? Are they going to be zoned like adult businesses would be? Or are they going to be certain requirements on them? For example, the people can't have criminal histories that run them or things like that. I want to deal with those issues before we have complete legalization
Sure.
or even partial legalization, because that is where we're headed.
Right.
So I tried to think I was making a common sense approach to the whole issue.
Sure.
And of course, the issue of mobile dispensaries, is very difficult because are we really going to have our police track down anyone driving through our city who's delivering marijuana to a cancer patient?
Right.
That seems something that I'm not sure I want our police to be busy at the borders.
One could argue it's a waste of time.
Yeah, waiting for some marijuana truck to come and give marijuana to a cancer patient. I just didn't think that was a good use of resources.
So both were voted.
Both were voted as bans
Right.
in 3-2. And I was on the minority end of the council.
So where does the city go from here?
Well, the real question is we might have a legal challenge on the mobile dispensaries because that's a whole different issue. It's sort of like saying you can't bring a food truck into the city.
Right.
If a neighboring city has a food truck, what are the rules if a food truck rolls across the city border? That's something that hasn't been litigated, so I think that's a possibility. I think we'll end up back here visiting again. My fear is we're suddenly going to have complete legalization and we won't have anything in place to deal with it.
Right.
And then we'll be scrambling, with our, like chickens with our head cut
If I
off.
can, we didn't decide we were going to discuss this, but I'm sure you'll be fine with it. I want to talk about the recent California Republican Party convention. Were you there?
I was there.
Suffice it to say, it was a rocky convention. I think one could say.
I've been to Rockier.
You've been to, I'm sure you have. But, look.
I've caused Rockier.
Yeah, exactly. Emails leak and there was some contention about the fact that we don't appear to have a united ticket. At least two of your candidates statewide, Ashley Schweringen and Pete Peterson, have opted against formally endorsing Neil Kashkari, who's the gubernatorial nominee. It's kind of interesting it's those two because those two are seen as fairly viable statewide. What do you make of all the ruckus, or is this just inside baseball and a waste of time?
It's really inside baseball. We've had this kind of ruckus every time. We had it with Meg Whitman. We had it with Bill Simon.
Right.
We had it, with Pete Wilson. We've had Dan Lundgren. We can
Right.
go back. We've always had it. Every convention I've been to, we've had this kind of ruckus and this kind of stuff.
But that other nominees are not endorsing the top of the ticket? This seems surprising.
Well, actually, we've had that before. I
Really?
mean, even with Pete Wilson, I remember Tom McClintock and Pete Wilson. There was a lot of animosity and tension there, and so I think people forget that because every 4 years they assume everyone's going to be unified.
Right.
And
But
and
wait,
that's not the way it works.
the cliche. The cliche is, let me make sure I get this right. I'm not a member of any organized party. I'm a Democrat.
Right.
You've heard that. So I would expect
That's actually not true.
You would expect the Republicans. It's like Republicans. They're right in the box and they keep it
No,
together.
actually, it's not true. It's because we're not part of a collective. The Republican Party, we're much more individualistic.
Oh, okay.
And
Well, one could
rather
say.
than the collective. And,
Okay.
if you go to a Democratic
you've heard that
convention-
cliche.
I've heard that cliche.
Yeah.
And it may have been true at one time, but it's
Right.
not true now. It's not true now.
So what do you make of November?
What do I make in November?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. Obviously, I think Republicans could end up winning the U.S. Senate. And I
Right.
think here in California, I think there's going to be a pickup of Republican seats in the state assembly.
But why
probably
does
state Senate.
California seem to be counter-cyclical with the nation?
Well, it's not always cyclical, but
right.
this cycle it kind of is,
Yeah.
or it might be. And part of it is the top of the ticket has to have enough money to articulate the vision, and so that's part of the issue.
It's all good. He is Mike Spence. He is a member of the West Covina City Council. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is California Edition.